The first video game boss was the Cold Dragon in text-based game called The Game of Dungeons back in 1975. In Phoenix, we have to fight mechanical space birds and a giant mothership at the end of every round. Sinistar from 1982 has a boss that slowly assembles itself and starts chasing the player. Let's get inspired by these classics and implement our own version.
I have no data on this creature. Its shell is pure tellurium polymer, impossible to scan. There are no records on this species.
No one who meets this creature survives to tell the tale.
I'm trying to get more data. In the meantime, the only strategy we have is raw firepower. Hit it with everything we have before it hits us.
And let's try to avoid these massive tellurium claws. Something tells me they would cut through our shields like butter.
Yes, any close contact will result in immediate shields failure. Keeping our distance is imperative.
When writing custom code for a project like this, the most important thing is to always be aware which code runs just once, which code block runs when a specific event happens, and which code runs over and over for every animation loop. In our game, the enemies come in larger and larger waves. What if I want every third wave to be a randomized boss encounter, and as the game goes on, I want the bosses to have more and more health, gradually increasing the challenge for the player. If you are watching the full extended version, the full source code from each stage is included in the download section down below. If you are watching a free YouTube version, don't forget to click the like and let me know you want more projects like this. As usual, I start by importing the art assets. You can download boss PNG file in the resources section below. Place that image inside the project folder and link it in index.html file, like this. I give it an ID of boss. We hide it with CSS. If you inspect the sprite sheet, I created 4 different boss creatures. The sprite sheet is organized like this. The first 2 frames will play when we hit the boss with a projectile, and the boss will move a little bit to react to being hit. When we deplete all its hit points, all its lives, the rest of the sprite sheet will play. I hope you like the pop animations I made. I was having a bit of fun with this. Down here on line 160, I create a custom boss class. Constructor will run only once to create a boss object. Every time we call this class using the new keyword, we will be pointing to the main game object as we did before, to get access to all properties and methods that sit on there. I want the boss to be much larger than regular enemies, so width and height will be 200 times 200 pixels. I want the boss to start exactly in the middle of the screen horizontally, so this.game.width times 0.5 minus half of the width of the boss. At first it will be hidden behind the top edge of the visible game area, so the vertical y coordinate will be minus this.height. Horizontal speed, speed x, will be randomly -1 or +1. To do that, we use ternary operator that evaluates math.random expression like we did before. If math.random is less than 0.5, so in approximately 50% of the cases, speed x is -1. The boss will start moving to the left, else the boss will move to the right. Speed y will be 0 initially. Boss will always have, let's say, 10 lives at first. The next boss will have more health. We will increase lives each time we create a new boss wave. I will also give it max lives. That property will remember the initial this.lives value so that I can award the player the appropriate amount of score points when the boss is defeated. Marked for deletion will be false at first. This.image will point to the sprite sheet I have that contains 4 different boss creatures. Frame X will handle horizontal sprite navigation. We will start at frame 0, so the left column. Frame Y will determine which one of these 4 bosses we will see. It will handle vertical sprite navigation. Each time we create a new boss, I want to randomly pick one of these 4, so frame Y will be a random value between 0 and 4. We use math.floor here to round it down to the nearest lower integer. We do that because there is no row 1.5 in the sprite sheet, for example. We want only integers, so now this expression gives us either 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. We need to know the maximum horizontal frame to check if the entire explosion animation finished playing and we can remove the boss object from the game. I will set max frame to 11. This reminds me that I forgot to do one thing in the previous lesson. Down here in the new wave method, on the main game class, we push new wave object into this.waves array whenever the previous wave of enemies is defeated. If I console log this.waves and I play, I defeat wave 1, wave 2, wave 3. We can see in the console that this.waves array is endlessly growing and the old waves just stay there, even though they don't contain any active enemies anymore. To fix this, I go up here to our custom wave class. I give it a property called marked for deletion, and initially it will be set to false. Inside render method on wave class, we know that this method runs for every animation frame, moving the wave around the game area and filtering out destroyed enemies out of its this.enemies array. When the player destroyed all enemies and this.enemies length is 0, there are no enemies left in this wave, we will set marked for deletion on this wave object to true. So when this wave object has enemies array that contains 0 enemies, it means we defeated all of them and the new wave was created. We want to delete this old wave. Down here, where we create a new wave, we will filter out old waves every time we add a new wave to the game. We check this.waves array and we filter it. Only those elements that have marked for deletion property set to false are allowed to stay in this.waves array. If they have marked for deletion set to true, they will be removed. Now I play the game and I only ever see 2 waves, the old one and the new one that was just created. Actually, if I move the console log here and I play the game, we can see that this.waves array only holds 1 currently active waves object. I hope this makes sense. Any questions about this, you can leave a comment. Let's go back to the boss class. It will need a custom draw method to draw the boss in game, and update method to move it around, to define its behavior. We have a sprite sheet with multiple frames we want to swap between, which means we will need the longest version of drawImage method, a version that takes 9 arguments, the image we want to draw, source x, source y, source width and source height of an area we want to crop out from the source image, and, as usual, destination x, destination y, destination width and destination height to define where on destination canvas we want to place that cropped out frame onto. I want to crop out top left frame from coordinates 0, 0, 2, width and height, and I want to place it on canvas at position this.x, this.y, this.width, this.height, like this. The boss will start entirely hidden behind the top edge of canvas. I want it to flow into view until it's fully visible. If this.y is less than 0, this.y plus equals 10 pixels per animation frame. This is a good basic setup for the boss. Now let's actually draw it so we know what we are working with. Down here on the main game class, we know that all the code we put inside the constructor is automatically executed at the point when we create an instance of that class using the new keyword. I am automatically pushing wave number 1, the first group of enemies, into the game as soon as we created the game. I delete this for now. I will create a boss array that will hold all currently active bosses. We will probably only have 1 active boss at a time, but we could easily have multiple ones if you want to make the game even more challenging for our players. Down here, we have a custom restart method that runs when we get a game over and when we press letter R. In here you can see I'm just setting everything back to the default values. The problem is that if I want to make any changes to any of this as I develop the game, I need to make the same changes up inside the game class constructor to those properties and also down here in the restart method to make sure it's consistent with the time when the game first starts and when it restarts. I could avoid having to do that by actually calling restart method from the constructor, meaning that it will reset all the values as soon as the game starts. Maybe we could also call that method something like initialize. Either way, now that I've done this, these initial values of 1, 1 here don't really matter because here, even before the game starts, restart method will set columns and rows to 2, 2, because those are the values we used down here. When we restart the game, we also need to set boss array to an empty array like this to clean up. Now, because we know that the restart method runs immediately, we can put any code in there that we want to run when the game starts and when the game restarts. I'm already automatically pushing the first enemy wave here. Let's also use our new custom boss class to push one new boss object into the boss array. I need to go up here inside the render method, and we need to call its draw and update. Boss array for each boss object inside boss array, call its draw method. We know it expects context, and also call its update. Nice, we have boss and enemy wave at the same time. Now we know that we can go down here inside the restart method, and maybe we want to start the game with a wave of enemies. Or maybe we want to start with a boss wave, which is what I will do now, because we are building and testing our boss logic. I can change this value to make the boss float into view faster or slower. You can decide your own speed value here. I will go with 4 pixels per animation frame. I want to give the boss the same left and right movement pattern we gave to the wave of enemies. So if horizontal x coordinate of the boss is less than 0, meaning if the boss is touching the left edge of game area, or the horizontal position of the boss is more than game width minus the width of the boss, meaning that the boss is touching the right edge of the game area. In both of these cases, we swap speed x value from line 167 to its opposite, which will make the boss bounce left and right. Now I just need to increase this.x by speed x for every animation frame, and I will also increase this.y by speed y. Nice, we have a boss that floats into the view and it bounces left and right. I also want to give it speed y of 200 when it touches either edge, but that means the boss will just rush forward like this. I want that speed y property to increase only for one animation frame for a quick jump, and then immediately we set it back to 0. All of this movement stuff is exactly the same logic we used for wave motion before. Now it works. I will make the vertical jump equal to half of the boss's height, like this. We can always see only this frame because I'm cropping from 0, 0 to width and height. If I want randomized row instead, I use source y argument for that. 0 times this.height is this frame, 1 times height is this frame, 2 times height will give us this version of Mantis Morph, and 3 times height will give us this Deep Space Lovecraftian monster. We already prepared frame y property for this purpose on line 174, so let's use it here. Source x will handle horizontal sprite navigation. It will be frame x from line 173 times this.width from line 163. For example, if frame x is 5, it will give us this frame. If you got this far in this course, I think you understand this part already, so let's just move on. Whenever we reload the game or create a new boss using our custom boss class, we will randomly get one of these 4 boss creatures. Perfect. The first boss will be easy, it will only have 10 lives. Let's actually draw boss lives. We can choose to do it as a health bar or as a number. I will wrap this code between save and restore to make sure any changes to canvas state I make here are limited only to this area. I will call built-in fill text method, which takes at least 3 arguments. The text we want to draw, so this.lives from line 169, and x and y of an anchor point in relation to which the text will be displayed. Let's start with x and y of the boss, which as we know is the top left corner of the boss hitbox rectangle. I actually want to move the text a bit down, maybe plus 50 pixels vertically, and horizontally, let's try the width of the boss times 0.5. Doing this put the text anchor point exactly in the middle, but by default the text is left aligned from there. I will use text align property and I will set it to center, because we wrapped this code block between save and restore. That means it will only affect boss lives and not any other text we are drawing on canvas. To make the white text more visible against the background, I can also give it a shadow. Shadow offset x 3 pixels, shadow offset y 3 pixels as well, and shadow color can be black. Now that we see boss lives, let's set up collision detection between boss and projectiles. Inside update method, on boss class, I will take projectile spool array that sits on the main game class. I call for each method on it. For each projectile in projectile spool array, I will check the following. If check collision method between this boss object and the projectile we are currently cycling over with for each method, if the collision check on their rectangular hitboxes returns true, at the same time, double ampersand operator, I only want to check if the projectile is active because projectiles come from a reusable object pool, so only if free property on projectile is false, meaning the projectile is being used. It's active in the game. One more check. If lives of the boss are more than 0, because when we depleted boss lives and the explosion animation frames are playing, I want the new projectiles to ignore that and fly through it, not collide with it. Only after all these 3 checks are true, boss and projectile are colliding with an active projectile and boss has more than 0 lives, we reduce lives of the boss by 1. We will also call reset method on the projectile, which means the projectile object will become inactive and it will be returned back to the object pool. I test it. Yes, when I hit the boss, we deplete its lives. This is going really well. Instead of reducing lives directly like this, I will create a hit method that will take damage value as an argument and it will reduce lives by that damage. I want the boss to move and animate a bit and react to being hit, so we will swap between frames 0 and 1, only if lives are more than 1. When hit, we will set frame X to 1, displaying this frame. Now I use hit method here, and I pass it damage of 1. Okay, that still works. We hit the boss and we swapped frame to frame 1, this one. Now I want it to return back to the original frame 0. But we want to wait for sprite update flag to be true to slow the animation down, same as we did with enemies. And also we only return to that frame if boss lives are more than 0, because when they get to 0, we want to play the entire animation row. Nice. Now if we hit the boss, as long as boss lives are more than 1, we swap between frame X0 and 1 to make the boss wiggle and react to being hit. If I reload and I get a different boss creature, we can see it moves in a different way. I gave each boss a subtle way to react to being hit like this. It helps to give the player more visual feedback to make the game feel more alive, I think. We are using basic static images, but they react to inputs and actions. Sprite sheets have only a small number of frames, but everything is reactive. This is one of performance-friendly ways to animate your games. I will say more than 0 here actually. When boss lives reach 0, we want to animate the rest of the sprite sheet where the boss is getting inflated and destroyed. If the lives of the boss are less than 1, and if sprite update flag is true, we will start slowly increasing frame X by 1, traveling through the sprite sheet horizontally. Let's test it. I hit the boss 10 times. Nice, it plays the animation. You can see that the boss is still there. It's just showing a blank sprite frame. Actually, I don't need to draw 0 lives. We will only draw lives if this.lives is more than 0. Now we destroy boss. We are no longer drawing its lives, and projectiles no longer collide with it, but the invisible boss is still there, moving around the screen. We need to remove it using marked for deletion property we defined here on line 171. As we update horizontal frames, if frame X is more than max frame, we set max frame to 11 here on line 175. At this point we know that the boss was destroyed and that all animation frames of explosion were displayed. We know at this point it's safe to remove the boss object from the game entirely, so I will set its marked for deletion property to true. I will also increase game score by this.max lives, which holds the initial number of lives the boss had, in this case 10. Boss with 10 lives will award 10 score points when defeated. We set marked for deletion to true here, and I go down to the main render method and I will filter out boss array. This line of code runs for every animation frame, which is a bit of a waste, to be honest. We could easily just put it somewhere else, for example into new wave method, and only clean all the boss objects periodically. We don't have to check for every animation frame. We already covered how filter method works and how it filters out all the objects from the array that have marked for deletion property set to true. Let's see if it works by console login this.boss array. We have one boss inside the array. We deplete all its lives, explosion animation plays, and now I can see in console that boss array is empty. Great. I delete the console log. Now we need to decide what happens if boss gets all the way down and collides with the player. I check if custom check collision method between this boss object and player object returns true. At the same time, only run this code when boss has more than 0 lives, because there could be a scenario where player collides with explosion animation frames, which would be fine, because the boss was destroyed already. We don't want to register collision in that case. Inside I set game over to true. We need to destroy the boss before it touches the player, otherwise its claws go straight through our shields. The boss is very dangerous. At the same time, I can set lives of the boss to 0 to trigger the explosion animation sequence if I want to. Let's say our shields will also destroy the boss. I don't know, come up with your own story. Let's test it. I will speed this up. When the boss touches the player, we get game over and the boss explodes. That worked, perfect. Another loose condition would be if boss gets all the way down here and touches the bottom of the screen. If vertical position of the boss plus its height is more than the height of the game, meaning that the bottom edge of the boss touches the bottom of the visible game area. We set game over to true. When I destroy the boss, like this, I want the game to continue and I want regular waves of enemies to keep coming. So, boss was destroyed here, and if game over is false, we call our custom new wave method. Let's test it. I destroy the boss, and we get a wave of enemies. I destroy all enemies in the wave, and I get another larger wave. This is a pretty good game loop already, isn't it? Well done if you followed all the way here. Every time a new wave comes, we are increasing wave count value, and we are displaying it here. We are calling new wave method we defined on line 393 here. Every time a wave count is divisible by 2 without any remainder, for example, so for waves 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on, we will push a new boss. Else, we will create a regular, increasingly large wave of enemies. I have to be careful about the brackets here. I say this.boss array push new boss, and I pass it this to point to the main game object we are inside of right now. I don't want to increase wave count here. I delete it. Instead, we increase wave count here inside new wave method. That way, both boss and enemy waves will increase wave count value now. Let's test it. We start the first wave with a boss, as we defined inside restart method on the first load. We defeat the boss. Wave counter increases to 2, which is divisible by 2 with a remainder of 0, so this block runs and we get a boss again. We defeat it, wave is 3, this is false, so else statement on line 396 runs and we get a wave of enemies. 4 is divisible by 2 with a remainder of 0, so now we get a boss. You can change how often you want to get a boss by adjusting this value here. If you want the first wave, wave 0, to be boss or enemies, we define that inside restart method here. When the explosion animation starts playing, I don't want it to bounce from the edges anymore because that looks strange. If explosion starts playing, just let it flow off screen if it's close to the edges. So one more condition here that says if this.lives is more than 0, only do the regular left and right bouncing motion if the boss is not animating the final explosion. Now we are getting closer to the edge, and when I shoot the boss, the explosion doesn't bounce anymore. It just flows and continues in the direction the boss was already moving. I think this looks better. I noticed that when we defeat a boss wave, we don't get a bonus player life. To fix it, I cut this line of code and I paste it down here inside a new wave method. I defeat a boss, and yes, I get a bonus life. Good. Every time we create a new boss, I want it to have, let's say, 5 more lives to make the game gradually more and more challenging. I will store boss lives value here on the main game object. We will start with 10 lives. When we restart, we also need to go back to 10. I will pass boss lives as the second argument to boss class constructor for the boss in the initial first wave. And then, for every other consecutive boss we create, I will make sure that value is expected here on line 161, and we use it as the value for this.lives property. When we defeat a boss and it was destroyed, before we call the next wave, we increase boss lives property on the main game object by, let's say, 5, making the next boss a little bit more challenging. This boss has 10 lives. I destroy it. The next boss has 15 lives. That worked. We have waves of enemies that get larger and larger as the game goes on, and we have bosses with more and more health. Thank you everyone who commented on the videos and helped me design this game. If you have any more ideas and you want me to add more features, let me know in the comments. If you come up with something really good, I will do it and I will release it as a bonus lesson. More enemy types, super weapons, larger super bosses that actually shoot projectiles back at us. What do you want me to do next? Let me know. It's more fun for me if we design it together. As I play, I notice that the boss already loses some lives before it's even fully visible on the screen from the projectiles that are flying close to the top edge. Let's say I only want collision between boss and projectiles to happen after the boss floated all the way to its starting position and it's fully visible on screen, when the vertical position of the boss is more or equal to 0. Okay, I'm happy with this. What do you think? See you in the next part.